This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast. I'm Bryce Johnson with Harrison Zuckerberg. Together, we'll unpack fantasy, faith, and life. We are your fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win while also finding meaning and purpose throughout the fantasy season. We won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing as we bring you fantasy advice and biblical encouragement. I'm coming to you from the Unpacking It Ministry Studio here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Fantasy Football Fellowship is a part of Unpacking It Ministries. And if you haven't subscribed to the Unpacking It podcast, be sure to check that out. That releases every week. And we take current sports stories related to the Bible, related to life, and encourage you to listen to that each week as well. But we will be bringing you this fantasy show all season long, and we are excited to be on this journey with you. And so each week we'll have 15 episodes with new breakouts. That's right. So we've been doing Fantasy Football Fellowship for a number of years, and we're excited about the new breakouts that are being released throughout the season. And so a breakout, basically, we take a fantasy concept, we relate it to the Bible, we relate it to life. And so I'm going to jump in just a moment. We're talking decision-making today, how that relates to fantasy football and life. Coming up on the show, Harrison will tell you what he's convinced of. I will tell you what I'm convinced of as we head into the fantasy season. We will also just kind of talk about what we're looking forward to, especially week one, and some things to be aware of and to really watch this weekend. And man, here we are. Football is back. Thursday night, what a great start to the season with the Lions and the Chiefs. Can't wait for that. A lot of fantasy implications in that game. And I've got a number of players that will be playing, which I'm excited about. And then we'll also just sort of clarify what players Harrison is in on this season, which ones I am, and where we agree and disagree. And so we'll touch on a few of those guys just as we kind of get on the same page heading into the season. You as a listener know where we stand. And then here's what we do throughout the season. We do a couple different segments. We do a confession segment where we admit where we have been wrong on certain guys and kind of what that means moving forward. Okay, we were wrong about this player. Are we dropping them or moving on, or are we sticking with them? Because we'll be right eventually. And so that gives us kind of a baseline here today. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. But let me start with the breakout topic today. And here's the deal. When somebody's new to fantasy football, if you had to sum it up, like what is fantasy football? Like, what is that all about? Fantasy football is all about decision making. That's right. So the most important decision that we all make is to say yes to playing fantasy football. Will you join my league? Yes. Will you play this season? Yes. That's it. And then from there, it is a series of choices, a series of decision-making. And so it begins in the off season. You decide, okay, who are you going to listen to in preparation? How much time are you going to spend preparing for your fantasy drafts? And so you're choosing what websites to look at, what podcasts to listen to. You've made the right choice listening to this podcast, right? And so all of that is a choice. I'm going to listen over here. I'm going to read over here. And then you choose your fantasy team name. And so everybody's got to, you got to come up with a clever name. Is it off a movie line, or is it, playing off of a certain player on your team? What is it? So you got to choose. What's your team name? And then when the draft hits, every single round, every time you're on the clock, it is a choice. You are making a decision. I'm going to pick this player instead of that player. I'm going to choose this position instead of that position. I'm going to choose to wait on that player because I think I can get him a couple rounds later. I'm going to choose to take this guy now because I don't want to miss out on him. And so every step of the way, we are making choices throughout the draft, and then that leads to the season. And so all season long, we're going to be with you as you're making your weekly, lineup decisions. You're going to say, okay, am I going to start this guy or that guy? Am I going to go with a wide receiver in the flex spot or another running back? Or am I going to actually do two tight ends? One in the tight end spot, one in the flex spot. And then every week for the waiver wire, Am I going to decide to pick up this guy or that guy? Am I going to drop this player or pick up that player? Then when the trade offers come, you're making the choice. Am I going to choose that player and that deal that's been offered to me by another manager in the league? Or am I going to stand pat, stay with the team that I drafted, the team that I've got right now? And so that is what fantasy football is. It's all about decision making. And the ones that make the right decisions are the ones that last throughout the year. And yes, a lot is out of our control. Injuries are out of our control. Teams that end up being way worse than we expected because of other injuries to certain players and or the coaching situations that, all of that is out of our control. But as fantasy managers, we do the best we can with the information that we have, and we try to make, wise choices all throughout the season. And the teams that hit on those right choices are the ones that end up winning, or at least win a lot of games and are competitive and are in the mix throughout the entire season. And so as we think about our fantasy choices, okay, what's going to help us make wise choices? What's going to help us, make the right decisions throughout the season? We're gonna have to watch some football. We're gonna have to experience, the games, and we're gonna have to prepare and read and continue to do so. Right? It's not just in the off season. We got to continue to do that. And so, all right, how does this relate to our own lives, and how does this relate to faith today? You and I know that every day is about choices. Every day we make decisions. How will we spend our time? How will we spend our money? Are we going to choose to do the right thing or the wrong thing? Are we going to choose to work hard or not work hard? Are we going to choose to love people or not love people? Are we going to choose to spend time with God in reading and pray and fellowshipping? And are we going to choose to go to church? Or are we going to choose to skip church and watch pregame? Oh, that hits us. That hits us. No, we want to choose worship. Worship God before we worship. We don't want to worship these players at all, but before we even dive into what happens on Sundays where everybody shows up to stadiums worshiping players. No. We want to choose to worship the creator of the world and the God that loves us. And so we prioritize that. But it's all a choice. And so the ultimate choice, the first choice is, are we going to choose to receive the free gift of salvation that Jesus offers us? He went to the cross. He paid the punishment. He offered us a trade. Will we accept the trade? He went to the cross so we didn't have to. But we have to choose to receive the grace and the love and the forgiveness that he offers us. And then every day we have a choice. Are we going to follow him, or are we going to follow our own way? Or are we going to decide to go the route that he has for us and trust him to lead us and guide us? Or are we going to decide I'm going to do my own thing. I've got it. Yeah. My limited understanding seems right. I'm going to do that. And so every choice we make throughout life, we choose where we're going to go to college or not go to college. We choose, okay, am I going to marry this person or not? And then every day we choose, am I going to continue to love my spouse? Am I going to serve my spouse? It's a choice. And so we know this every day. It's choice after choice after choice. Yes, we got to choose what we're going to have for dinner. We got to decide, am I going to eat all of it, or am I, all right, I've had enough. It goes on and on and on. But as followers of Jesus, how are we going to continue to make the wise choices and continue to choose him so that at the end of our lives, we can look back and go, wow, I made wise choices because I pursued him. I trusted him. I went to the Bible for answers. I went to Jesus every time I needed to make a choice. I went to him. And so that's what we have to consider every day. And so just a couple of verses to share kind of in light of this. I think it's so important that we have to operate with wisdom. And the good thing is God gives us wisdom in decision-making. And so James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. So God gives generously wisdom to help us make wise choices, to do what's right. And so John 3:36, whoever believes in the Son has eternal life. Whoever does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains on him. And so are we going to choose to believe in the Son, Jesus, so that we can have eternal life and live life now with him, with his leading, his strength, his peace, his joy, It's a choice. Every day we have a choice. Do we want to live in joy with him or live based on the world's standards and the world's ways of doing things? And so what will we choose? Romans 6:23 says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God, that is his remarkable, overwhelming gift of grace to believers, is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord." So will we decide to receive that and then every day to follow him and go his route? That's the choice. Every day is a choice. And so in fantasy and in life, it's all about decision making. And so let's evaluate, where are we at? Are we making the right choices? And we can look back and maybe we made a lot of bad choices. The great thing about fantasy football is it's a new season. And even if you made bad choices in the draft, now you can make good choices and the right choices when it comes to the waiver wire. We're here to help you with that throughout the season. And then in life too, maybe you blew it when you were younger, previously, but God's grace covers that. And now moving forward today, let's make the wise choice. Let's make the right choices moving forward. So I hope that's encouraging to you today. And I hope that we'll evaluate that in our own lives. And most importantly, we'll make the choice. We'll make the choice to follow him. Just like, hey, the right choice is to play fantasy football, baby. So those are the big choices for us today. All right. Well, as we head into the season, let's bring on Harrison Zuckerberg. He's been with us all off season as we've been drafting. Well, now it's lineup decision time. And so Harrison, as you reflect back on the draft and as you kind of look at some of your teams gearing up for this week, what are some of the tough lineup decisions or decisions in general that you've been facing?
The hardest decision for me right now going into week one is who do I start in my flex position? Because you and I have both been huge fans of James Cook and Antonio Gibson throughout the offseason.
Yes.
And in a few leagues, I have both of them. But the problem is, who do I start week one? James Cook is going up against the Jets, who are one of the best defenses in the NFL. There's a real chance that they just say, you know what, we're going to put the ball in the hands of our best player, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, and they're going to dominate all the touches in this game. And he doesn't get a huge workload. But then Antonio Gibson has the opposite thing going on, and he's going up against the Arizona Cardinals, who are probably the worst defense in the NFL, with a first-time quarterback starting in Sam Howell. So maybe they give him a huge workload in a game that might be a blowout. I mean, Cook, I think, is the more talented player and overall in the better offense, but I'm really struggling. Do I go with the talent or the opportunity with Gibson?
Oof, I kind of like Gibson against the Cardinals. I think throughout the season, if I'm facing that decision on who to start, Arizona's the defense, start this guy. Absolutely. Now, the one caveat is they might blow Arizona out, so Gibson won't get a lot of those dump offs necessarily. But I think they'll be able to just both running backs, Brian Robinson and him, will have a big day. It's Eric Bieniemy's debut as the offensive coordinator for Washington. He's going to want to light it up. It's Sam Howell's kind of big debut as the official franchise starting quarterback. Last year, I know he played at the end of the season, but they're going to want to burst onto the scene. So I'd probably go Arizona. Or
I think
Antonio, I mean.
I would agree with that. And I think the biggest probably decision factor here for me is, does Terry McLaurin play or not week one? Because if he's out, then I'm 100% going Gibson, because he's going to be the number 2 option in that passing offense, really, behind Jahan Dotson. If Terry does play, then I could see it being, a little bit more spotty usage in the passing game for Gibson, especially if it is a blowout. They could just go with Brian Robertson and, run the clock out late. But I think Gibson is definitely the way that I'm leaning right now.
All right. I'm with you on that. So speaking of tough decisions, and I want to get into some of the kind of the news of the week and some of the injury concerns and what we're dealing with as fantasy managers heading into Thursday, especially. So the one name that I've already been kind of wrestling with and regretting my decision is I passed on Kadarius Toney. And my philosophy on players is, if a guy's always injured, he's commonly injured, I don't want to deal with him. But Kadarius Toney was such value in drafts this summer. I mean, you could get him so late. And I stared at him one time and I just said, I can't do it. I can't do it. But now it looks like he might actually play in week one. He might be the number 1 wide receiver this year in Kansas City when healthy. And so that was one of those decisions that I don't know, I wrestled with. It was really tough. And so if you did get him, I think you're going to have some really good weeks with him. Now, Will he be reliable when you need him most come the final few weeks of the season heading toward a fantasy championship? I don't know. I don't know if you can trust him yet because we haven't seen it. We haven't seen any reliability out of him. But the talent's there. The opportunity in Kansas City is definitely there. So that's an interesting one. So we're kind of wondering, all right, how healthy is he? Will he officially be good to go? So that's an interesting one. And then the other thing in LA with Cooper Kupp. That's another guy. I love Cooper Kupp, but the injury concerns, and now he's seeing a specialist and a hamstring. What are you doing with Cooper Kupp?
Yeah, unfortunately, I took Cooper Kupp in a draft a few weeks ago when it looked like he was going to be ready to go for week one. They said he was back on the field. I'm like, okay, he's fallen a little bit now. This is good value at the end of the first round. And then now I'm not so sure. I'm a little bit concerned. Luckily, in that league that I did take him, I went really wide receiver heavy early on. So I have other wide receivers that I can start. But yeah, it's concerning, especially for a guy that's getting up there in age. I mean, hamstrings, they tend to linger throughout the season. But back to your point with Kadarius Toney, early in the offseason, I was super out on Kadarius Toney because of where he was going in drafts. He was going in the 8th round. People were projecting him to be the number one receiver for Kansas City when we didn't even know if he was going to be on the field. But now he's fallen to the 11th, 12th rounds of drafts. In some leagues, he's even been dropped onto the waiver wire if you're in like a 10-man league. I mean, there's no one else really that I think you can get either on waivers or in the last rounds of your draft at this point who have the upside of giving you like a 30-point week, which he does. He could easily go for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns one week this season. He's not going to do that every week, but the upside is definitely there. So I think he's an absolute steal if you can still get him on your roster. And, maybe if someone has Cooper Kupp and they're unsure, or, I don't know, go trade for Kadarius Toney. He's definitely at the end of someone's bench and they may be willing to get rid of him for cheap. And I think the upside is just unmatched for his value right now.
I agree. Yeah. But it's all about value. But yeah, the injury concern is there. So you embrace that and you roll the dice with them. But I'll be curious to see if there is another wide receiver that really emerges. Can Sky Moore take the next step? Rashee Rice is a rookie for Kansas City. So we'll get to see that Thursday night. All right. The couple other injuries going on. You got Miami, the running back situation. It seems like Jeff Wilson. I thought he was going to be the guy. So now he's out for the first 4 weeks. So they did not get Jonathan Taylor. They never signed anybody. They didn't get Dalvin Cook. So now it looks like we got some clarity in Miami. I'll let you talk about that. And then also with the Jets, this is going to be a fascinating team to watch early in the season because I think we just have a lot of questions. And so how healthy is Breece Hall? What's that split like with Dalvin Cook? Does Garrett Wilson, take a huge step forward because it's Aaron Rodgers? We saw how good he was with mediocre to horrible quarterback play. Does he go, oh my goodness, he's just unbelievable? Or is it Alan Lazard, Rodgers' trustworthy receiver who sort of surprises maybe and overachieves a little bit? So both of those teams, Miami and the Jets, kind of some questions, some injuries, some new players in the mix. What will you be watching for and jumps out to you?
I think the big thing with Miami is what the injuries do to Devon Achane, the rookie that they have there, just absolutely explosive running back. Because in the beginning of the offseason, he was being drafted as if he was going to be the starter there, if not right away, but eventually at some point during the season. He was going ahead of Mostert. He was going ahead of Jeff Wilson. And then the preseason came along and he got kind of banged up. He was the 4th running back on the field in preseason games behind Wilson, behind Mostert, behind even Myles Gaskin. But now Myles Gaskin is no longer on the team. He's cut. Jeff Wilson is now injured for at least the first 4 games of the season and possibly even longer. They don't really know what's going on with him. So it's really just a 2-man backfield. And I'm going to absolutely bet on the young talent of Devon Achane to beat out Raheem Mostert and take this starting job from him. And once again, like we talked with Kadarius Toney, he's someone who, because of injuries and just what's kind of happened in the preseason, he's on waivers in a lot of leagues right now, and he could be a starting running back by week 3 or 4, depending on how well Mostert does in the first opening games. I mean, Mostert himself, he's never been someone that's been healthy during his career, so we could easily see Mostert be out by week 6, and then Achane is the only running back left on the roster. So I think he's an absolute value right now. The fact that, he is not getting drafted but guys like Roshan Johnson on the Bears who have two guys who are healthy in front of him, just makes no sense to me.
Is Deontay Foreman healthy?
Yes.
Okay, he's good
Yeah.
to go. Yeah, I drafted Khalil Herbert, so I did snag him the other night in one of my leagues. So, yeah, the Chicago, there are a number of rookie running backs we got to keep an eye out for. But you're right, Rashawn Johnson, he's got a little bit of a path to get some time ahead of him. But A-Chain, you look at Kendre Miller, if he can get healthy, he's going to get an opportunity early in the season in New Orleans. So snag some running backs late, some rookie running backs that has some upside. I'm all in on Sean Tucker in Tampa Bay. Some good news coming out of Tampa Bay camp with him and his opportunity even early in the season. So Sean Tucker, remember that name. And that leads us to our next segment. I'm convinced. We're going to go through a couple players we're convinced of, and we just want to be on record for. Maybe some things we said back in July, some of that we still believe now, but things have changed. Training camp, preseason, we've learned a lot about certain players and situations. And so here's, before the season starts, this is where we stand. And so I'll start with, I got two for you. I'm convinced Jahmyr Gibbs, talking about rookie running backs, absolutely lights it up in Detroit this season from the word go. This Thursday night against Kansas City, the world will be watching Jahmyr Gibbs. People are going to go, whoa, wow, this is why Detroit traded up to get him. And this is why the fantasy community got excited about Jahmyr Gibbs. And so I think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be great this year for fantasy managers. I'm also convinced that the New Orleans Saints offense is going to be really, really good and produce a lot of fantasy relevant players. And I think Chris Olave has a chance to be a wide receiver 1. I feel really good about that. I'm convinced of that. I'm convinced Juwan Johnson can be a tight end 1. And I'm convinced that Kendre Miller is going to be in the mix as a reliable running back as well. So, and then Derek Carr. I drafted Derek Carr, and I think he's going to surprise people and be, I think he'll be a QB1. I'm willing to say it. I'm convinced he'll be a QB1. He'll be a top 14 quarterback this year. But he was drafted much deeper than that. So I'll share a couple more, but why don't you jump in, Harrison?
My first thing that I'm convinced of is that Mike Williams is going to have a huge bounce back year and will finish as a top 20 wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers. It feels like everyone is super in on the Chargers and Justin Herbert having a great season and this offense taking a step under Kellen Moore, but no one's in on the Chargers wide receivers. If the offense is going to be as amazing as we think, one of these guys is going to have to finish as a top 15 receiver in Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. And my bet's going to be that it's Mike Williams. I mean, last year, I don't know what they were doing on offense, but the Chargers had one of the lowest average depth per targets or pass attempts in the NFL. Justin Herbert was throwing more checkdowns than guys like Jimmy Garoppolo and Daniel Jones, which makes no sense because if you watch Justin Herbert play, that's a guy who was built to throw the deep ball down the field, specifically to Mike Williams. So I think Kellen Moore is going to take advantage of that this year. Mike Williams is going to be hit on a lot more deep balls. They've been saying that that's something they want to put an emphasis on for this team is stretching the field. And then we look at touchdowns as well. If we think that Justin Herbert's going to throw 30, 35 touchdowns this season, somebody has to catch them. Keenan Allen's never been a huge touchdown guy in his career. He usually has about 5 or 6. Their tight end there, Gerald Everett, hasn't been a big touchdown guy either. He'll probably go for 3 or 4. So where are those other 25 touchdowns going? They can't all go to Austin Eckler. So Mike Williams, I think, is going to have double-digit touchdowns this year, and he's going to have some huge plays down the field and finish as a top 20, definitely, maybe even top 15 guy, which I think is just a great value right now to have in your flex position.
So I've got Mike Williams as my number 1 wide receiver. So I'm in. I am in on Mike Williams. I went heavy on running back, and so Mike Williams is my guy. So we are in agreement there. And I think we are also in agreement here. So I'll share a little bit, you share a little bit. But I'm convinced Nick Chubb is the running back to own this year. That he is, if CMC is healthy, I think he'll still be the number 1 running back. But I think Nick Chubb is right there with him. And I think Nick Chubb is going to have a monster season. So I talked about it last week. I got my Nick Chubb cereal here in the studio. Drafted him in 2 different leagues. So I am all in on Nick Chubb. Why are you in on Nick Chubb?
I'm in on Nick Chubb because I think he's going to finish as the overall RB1. Like you said, if CMC stays healthy, he might do it. But I think Chubb has the best bet because he was the RB1 for the first 10 weeks of the season last year, which a lot of people don't remember. And he probably there's a lot of things going in his favor. I would say he's the best bet in the NFL to lead the league in rushing yards. I would think he definitely has the best, O-line opportunity competition there to do that. I also think he's probably one of the best bets to score 15 plus touchdowns, given how much better we project Cleveland's offense to be now with a full year of Deshaun Watson coming back and Chubb, again, being the main goal line guy there. And I also think he's a pretty good bet to have 40 receptions this year now that Kareem Hunt is gone, and he's going to be even more involved in the passing game, which is something that we've seen them talk about in preseason, saying Chubb is going to have the first crack at being that passing down running back, which isn't something that he's done in the past, but I think he's certainly talented enough to do so. So if you look at this, a guy who can lead the league in rushing, score, high double-digit touchdowns, and get 40 plus receptions for fantasy, that sounds like someone who's going to have a really good season, no matter what team, what year, what format you're playing it. So I think Nick Chubb is an absolute must draft. I don't think there's another running back that you should really take over him instead of CMC, really. And even if you did take Chubb over CMC, I wouldn't be mad about it.
I like to hear it. I was talking to a Cleveland Browns fan over the weekend. Our kids were playing on the park and talking a little Browns football, and he's very high on Chubb, and that's always encouraging to hear it from the fan base. So, all right, here I'm convinced of a couple under-the-radar players that at some point in the season everybody will catch on to just how good they are and how relevant they will be in fantasy football. And so one of my biggest targets in almost every league so far, wide receiver Nico Collins. You go, Nico, who's Nico Collins? Oh, he plays for a rookie quarterback in Houston. All right. Laugh about it. Laugh right now. I'm telling you, CJ Stroud is going to be good enough. He's going to take some steps forward this year. He's going to have to throw to somebody. They might be losing in some games. They're going to have to keep up with all these offenses in the AFC. He's going to be throwing it to Nico Collins. He's a big receiver. He can catch. He'll catch touchdowns. He's going to be great. And you can get him so cheap. Oh, my goodness. I've been stealing them. For people. So I'm all in on Nico Collins. I'm also convinced Jaylen Warren is, kind of that best backup running back that is going to get opportunity even with Najee Harris. But if Harris goes down, or maybe Warren even outplays him, I'm buying that narrative. And so I'm in on Jaylen Warren. I'm also, let's see, who else I'm convinced of? I was willing to take Travis Kelce in our Unpacking It league. I took him in the first round, 3rd overall. And so I'm convinced that Travis Kelce once again finishes as tight end 1, and he will have an unbelievable season yet again. I saw a nice quote today that encourages me. They'll put up the banner for the Chiefs and all that. He goes, I'm already over last year. Let's go. He's ready for the new season. He's over it. Forget the Super Bowl last year. It's go time. So Travis Kelce will finish 1 at tight end for tight ends. Number 2, Darren Waller. I'm convinced Darren Waller will be the second best tight end this season. And guess what, Harrison? I went Kelce in the 1st. Then I took Darren Waller in the 5th. So I've got both of them. I got both top tight ends this year, baby. So there you go. Anything else you're convinced of that you want to get on record?
The last thing that I'm convinced of, which it's taken me some time to really get on board here, because I have some hometown, skepticism, don't want to go too heavy on the Bears, but I think Justin Fields will end up being a top 4 fantasy QB this year. I've finally been convinced by seeing the explosive offense in the preseason. The connection between him and DJ Moore looks real. And I don't think this is that crazy of a thing to say, because last year he was the QB 6 for fantasy while attempting only 21 passes per game, which is just a historically low number. I don't think you let David Montgomery walk out the door for nothing. I don't think you bring in DJ Moore, and I don't think you pass on Bryce Young 1st overall if you are not committed to building this offense around Justin Fields, which is exactly what they have done. And that includes giving him more responsibility in the passing game. And he wasn't really a bad quarterback last year compared to other second-year QBs who we've seen make this elite jump. Last year, Fields had a 60.4 completion percentage, which doesn't sound great, but if you look at Jalen Hurts in his second year, Hurts was only slightly better at 61%. He gets A.J. Brown, that number goes up to 66% then the next year. Josh Allen was even worse at 59% his second year in the league. Gets Stephon Diggs, that number goes up to 69%. I don't think people really truly appreciate how important it is to have a number one receiver in the offense like DJ Moore. He's going to open up so much for the rest of the weapons, and I think Fields is going to benefit heavily from that in the passing game, along with the rushing ability we already know he has, and I think he will finish as a top 4 QB. I'm not going as high to say, 2 or 1 because Mahomes and Allen are pretty great, but I think he's definitely top 4 and could even give Hurts a run for his money at number 3.
All right, just to go against you, I'm convinced that Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert will finish ahead of Fields in total fantasy points this season. How about that?
Okay.
So those are 2 quarterbacks I'm in on this year, Herbert and Lawrence. So I'm all in on those guys. All right, so that's what we're convinced of. A couple weeks ago, we did pounding the table. A couple of those guys, I stand by Adam Thielen. I still think he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver in Carolina. So there's a little bit of a common theme there with Nico Collins, Adam Thielen playing with those rookie quarterbacks. Everybody's overlooking them. But I like both those guys. But you and I disagree on a few players, or we have throughout the summer. And so we'll get this on the record too. I'm out on Joe Mixon, but you're still buying in. I'm a little bit higher on Alexander Madison. I think he's going to live up to the opportunity. There's a little hesitation because Ty Chandler might get some time. Myles Gaskin's there now, but I'm still going with Madison. And then I've been going back and forth. I've been wrestling with this, but I think I'm still in on Jerry Jeudy. I actually don't have him on any of my teams yet. I got 2 more drafts, so I might still land him. I like Marvin Mims in Denver, but I still think if Jerry Jeudy gets out there and is healthy, I still think the talent is there and Sean Payton will maximize it. But I know you're out on Jeudy. So anyone else? I'm in on DK Metcalf. I forget if you are. So
I like Metcalf this season.
You like Metcalf as well. I'm in on Ayuk. I think you like Ayuk.
I like
as well.
Ayuk as well. Yep.
So those are a few guys. I'm probably a little higher than most on those guys. Christian Watson, I'm out on. So anything else you want to mention in that regard?
Yeah, I'll make my final last stand here for Joe Mixon because I've been on him as, finishing as a top 10 running back all offseason. I know you've been against that. I took him as an RB1 in some of my drafts.
Okay.
But I think what we need to look at for Mixon is I think a metric that we like to look at a lot for bounce back players in fantasy is expected touchdowns. It's one of the reasons why Miles Sanders was so undervalued last year. And one of the reasons why people love Deontay Johnson this year is because those guys had big workloads, but scored 0 touchdowns the previous season. So surely that can't happen again. There has to be some positive regression there. But I think that metric also applies for guys who scored more than 0 touchdowns like Joe Mixon did last year. He scored 7 rushing touchdowns, but he was actually 3rd in the NFL in expected touchdowns behind Jamal Williams, who scored 17, and Jalen Hurts, who scored 13. I think if that number gets back to where it was a few years ago when he had 13 rushing touchdowns, he's going to be a steal in fantasy, and that's what I'm projecting to happen. But also, he's not just a goal line touchdown guy in the Bengals offense. He had a career high in targets last year and had 60 receptions, which is crazy for the running back position. And that was even with Samaje Perine still on the team. Perine's now gone, so I'm not saying he's going to, get 80 receptions, but I think 50, 60 receptions is still certainly a hittable number for him. And when I look at Mixon and the other guys going in his area in the draft, there's a lot of what ifs. So a guy like Travis Etienne. Well, what if Travis Etienne gets involved in the passing game? Because we didn't see it at all last year. Or what if Kenneth Walker gets, a lot more goal line work and isn't just this home run hitter? There's no what ifs for Joe Mixon. We know he's the workhorse back there. We know he's going to get the passing down work. We've seen him produce in that role before, and we know the Bengals offense is going to be great. There's no doubt in my mind that he finishes as a top 10 running back this year.
All right. He'll struggle. Oh, it's going to get ugly in Cincinnati for Joe Mixon. That's what I'm saying. All right. So, the last two guys I want to mention is in New England. Everybody's overlooked Juju Smith-Schuster. The guy just catches passes. Like, he's not unbelievable. He's not elite, but Mac Jones has to throw to somebody. I think Juju, he'll be the number one receiver in New England. They got to keep up with all these offenses in the AFC East. Juju's going to be the guy there. And then last week I talked about Jacoby Myers with the Las Vegas Raiders. Remember the name. Don't overlook Jacoby Myers. He's going to have a nice season. He was great in New England last year before injury, and I think he'll do well in Las Vegas this year. All right, so as we wrap things up today, heading into this weekend, what are you most excited to see, or kind of the biggest question marks that you have? I know for me, of course, we're intrigued by the rookies. Who bursts onto the scene right away? Who will it take a few weeks for? Will Jordan Addison come in right away and be the number 2 guy in Minnesota? And how impressive will he look? Have we downplayed just how good he could be this year? It dealt with some stuff in the offseason. All right. Is he going to be as good as Thielen was, even, as that number 2 guy behind Justin Jefferson or next to Justin Jefferson? Very intrigued by that. The Philadelphia Eagles. Who will they run the ball, or who will run the ball in Philly? I'm fascinated to see it. I basically punted from them. I got Kenneth Gainwell in one league, but other than that, I've avoided that backfield. And then in Jacksonville, will Calvin Ridley truly be as good as he was in Atlanta? And can Christian Kirk still play at that level that he did last year? And now will they have 2 elite receivers, or will Kirk take a step back and Ridley really dominate the offense? Again, we got to give it a few weeks to see some of this stuff play out, but week 1, we'll at least get our first glance at it. So what about for you?
Yeah, I think the Addison thing is really interesting because he was like the best receiver in this draft outside of JSN from a talent perspective and a production perspective in college. And you're throwing him into an offense that is going to pass the ball a lot. And even if he's not the true number 2 in targets right away, even if it is, obviously Justin Jefferson's 1, TJ Hawkinson is 2, he's going to get a lot of one-on-one matchups because they are so worried about those 2 other guys. And I think he can definitely excel in that role. One thing I wanted to mention about Juju, just to rebut you a little bit there, I think there's definitely value in his role in the offense. However, I did see a quote this week that concerned me a lot. I wanted to pull it up to get the exact quote, but it's that his knee is a ticking time bomb that could explode at any moment. And that is not what I want on my fantasy team. So I want guys who have 2 full knees that aren't going to explode. That would be preferable. So I think I'm out on Juju this season. Even if he does have some value, I just can't trust the injury risk there.
That is definitely concerning. I did not know that. So I'll stand by what I said, because I think the opportunity is there. We don't know. That ticking time bomb, it might be a couple years from now. We don't know. We don't know. What do they know? Doctors, get out of here. No, we'll see. But no, that's the case for a lot of these guys. A lot of these guys they're ticking time bombs with their hamstrings and groins and knees and everything else. So we do our best to avoid the injury prone guys for sure. So I overall, when I construct my teams, I factor in injuries in a big way. But I wanted a little bit of share of Juju, because I like the number 1 receivers. I know people don't usually agree with this. Everybody just wants the top, 3 receivers on the best offenses. And I understand it, but you pay the price for those guys. Some of these other players that get overlooked by the fantasy community, there's volume there because teams have to throw the ball. And so that's why, Thielen, Nico Collins, Juju Smith-Schuster, those are some of the guys that I've targeted. I still can't get Thielen. I got 2 more drafts to go. I got to try to get Thielen. I'll do my best to do that. Everybody's been listening to the show, I guess, and stealing Thielen from me. So that's been unfortunate. So Harrison, great job, man. The off season is over. So starting next week, we will go live on Tuesdays at 10:30. So that'll be exciting. 10:30 Eastern. We'll start doing the show live. And man, the season this Thursday kicks off. Detroit, Kansas City. Enjoy it. Enjoy watching Jahmyr Gibbs make his debut on my fantasy teams and also on the Detroit Lions. If you haven't become a member yet, be sure you sign up on fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Get access to all of our content and make sure your league signs up as well. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm Bryce. I'm a fantasy manager who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as fantasy managers who follow Jesus together. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.